Okay, so this rig is just a rig that we've got from the Moodle site. Let me just bring that up here. Where is it? That's where I got it from. It's not my rig, but I think it's a suitable rig. There's lots of rigs out there, but this is a nice simple one because it has no facial. It has nothing really to complicate the issue which we are trying to understand now, which is how to pose a character, a bipedal character. So we've got pretty much the same sorts of controls that I showed you with the earlier rigs, the rigs I showed you last week. The main things that you need to look for is the root of the character. And you have, that's probably the most important thing to get positioned right. And the things that we're going to be moving in this character are the root and the feet. Selecting a foot, moving it around. And same with your arms. You'll be selecting an arm, and with the arms they've got FK controllers, so you'll be rotating your arm around into a position that you feel is sufficient to create the pose that we described. So what I want to run through with you is some of the things, the ins and outs of making a character move. If your character is going to stay on the ground and you want to put the character into a pose that is balanced, so if we were to look at the bean characters that we had before, say my foot was, let me just select my foot. Here we go, select the foot, and say my foot had to be here, just to push it away from where it should have been. The next thing we want to do when we're posing our character is to grab the center of mass and then move it to the position where we put the bean in our drawing. So say for example, I had my bean about here and it was supporting its weight. The next thing I want to do is to try and rotate the spine to create the shape of the bean that we saw before. So here I've selected, and the way I've done that is that I click on one and I press Q to get rid of the manipulator. I've got W for move, E for rotate, R for scale. But if I don't want to see anything at all, I just press Q, which is just the equivalent of clicking on this button up here, which is to select. And the reason I do that is that it allows me to select one and then select something else. Now when you're posing the spine of a character, generally it's a good idea to select all of the segments of the spine at the same time. And the way I do that is you either can select it like that with one big marquee, or if you know what you're selecting, you can select one, hold down Shift, then select the next one. And as long as Shift is pressed down, you'll continue to add to the selection set. So now with 3 sections of the spine selected, I can now press E to rotate and then rotate my spine in a way which I feel is sufficient to get that pose happening. Now look what's happened with the knee there. It started to kink. That's because the thing which controls the way the knee is pointing is over here, and it's pointing over to where the knee is. And so what we need to make sure we keep aware of is that that little knee thing should always stay in front of the knee. So your challenge is to be able to now orient the rest of the body in a way which makes this balance. So with the foot, one of the things I want to get you used to is that if your foot is supposed to be on the ground, then you want to use these IK controllers, IK. But if, in this case, the foot is up in the air, we can switch it from an IK foot to an FK. And see, it's got a little controller at the back of the leg there. See that? If I select that, it's called a kinematic switch. It switches from one to another. If you select this switch FKIK and type in 1, it goes from being an IK, which is stuck to the ground, no matter where I move the pelvis, it will stick to that position, which is great for footwork. But if I'm doing something like swinging my feet in the air, if you switch it by typing in 1, or I just prefer to select the word and middle mouse click and drag across, that's another way of doing it. You can change numbers that way. So just to be clear, you select what you're interested in. In this case it was my kinematic switch. I click on the word, I push my mouse back into the screen, and then I click on the wheel, and see how it changes to an arrow? And the good thing about that is I can sit there and I can manually change that number. You can see the number over here as I scroll backwards and forwards is slowly changing from 0 to 1. So it allows me to, and you can do that with anything at all in Maya. Anything at all you can select. Say I wanted to move this, I can select the word and then move it that way. Anything you want. I call that eyeballing, because that way you're not just typing in numbers and hoping that they're right. You can select the number and then you can just adjust that number to make it work. So here, what I'm doing is I'm selecting the word and eyeballing it across the FK. And that way, the good thing about having an FK leg is, watch this, when I select my spine now and rotate it, it moves with the spine. So as my leg moves up, it moves up with, so as my pelvis moves, it adjusts with my pelvis. So now I can do something with my leg to a certain extent without making it look like the hip is popped out of itself, and then adjust my body again to make sure the things look like they're posed. So when you're, this is why I said draw 10 pictures and then choose one that you really, really like the look of and then pose it on the character, because as I pose things, it's taking me a long time and I have to move the pelvis and then I have to move let go of that and select the spine and rotate the spine, or however, say I wanted to adjust it in a different way. So now I feel like that again, I would be running by a particular pose that I've drawn here and running with that one, but now I'm just free posing. And as I move each different part of the body, you'll see that there are different things that need to be adjusted to make the character pose properly. Now, an important aside here is that when you select rotate, you're getting a particular way of rotating things, which is the biggest trap of all animation. And it's important that I explain this to you right now, because if I don't explain it to you now, it's going to really cause you a lot of problems later on in your animation work. And it's not an easy thing, so hold on to your seat as I try to explain this to you in a way that makes sense to you. When I select this elbow here, can you bend your elbow side to side? Can you twist your elbow? No. Only one thing you can do with an elbow, it's a hinge joint. It only bends in one direction. So a good rig should only bend in one direction. And yet, according to this manipulator, it's suggesting that I can twist it this way and all different kinds of ways, and yet I'm pulling on this way and it won't let me bend it. I'm pulling on here and it won't let me bend it. And yet, my manipulator, like this manipulator here, well, that's letting me do it. Lets me do that, lets me do that, lets me do that. So why is that one not letting me do it? And the answer is to look over here. See where it's got the controller numerical values for the elbow? It's only got rotation in Y, and yet I can see my manipulators for X, I can see the blue one for Z, I can see the green one for Y. Y bends, but nothing else does. I don't know where the word gimbal came from, but it is a word that's used to represent the rotation axes as you see them in the channel bar, the numeric values. So as if I was to select the word rotate Y and rotate, just like that. If I was to select, just say Z and rotate Z. So what gimbal rotation means, you'll hear this word used a lot, is pure rotation. Pure rotation, meaning only rotating something just in the y-axis, only rotating something just in the x-axis. So it's as if I grabbed just that value of x and I rotate only that, nothing else. Seems to still kind of make sense, doesn't it? The reason I say that is because when we select our arm here, and if I didn't specifically grab onto this y and I grabbed into the middle, look what happens to my x, y, and z. Are they pure rotations? As it's really nice. I can happily position my arm into any shape I want, but look what's happening with the x, y, and z. This is going crazy. This particular controller is wonderful for modeling. It's wonderful for lighting because you can position things very easily and quickly into any shape that you want. But for animation, it's really, really, it plants the seeds of bad things to come later on, because animation is a very organized procedure. It's important for things to move in certain ways. It's important to be able to remain in control of what's happening. If you're rotating your hands upwards, it's nice to keep the arc moving in an arc. And one of the easiest ways to keep things cleanly in an arc is to have only one thing moving. So if you're lifting your shoulder up, it might just be the rotation in Z going up. But if you lift your shoulder up and it has to get from here to here, it rotates maybe 5 degrees in X, 33 degrees in Z, 2 degrees in Y, but it's still there. It might go from here as it's rotating up like that. It might create that shape. It still gets to the same pose, but how it gets there is dictated by the way that you rotate it. So if you just rotate it simply up, you get a simple reaction. But if you rotate it with a whole mix of different values, it will give you a whole mix of a rotation on the way up. So the way that we can avoid this unfortunate, ugly occurrence from happening is to just rotate the values as they appear. Rotate X only. Rotate Y only. Now, the problem is that this manipulator here has a yellow circle around it, and if you see that yellow circle around the outside, this is the evil rotator. It actually has a second mode. This mode is designed for most things you do in Maya. Understand that Maya is not just about character animation. It's also used for lighting, modeling, texturing, visual effects, match moving, the list goes on. But specifically for animation, it's important that you learn to understand the difference between general rotation and animator's rotation. So if you double click on your rotator tool, and you can find it inside there, you'll see that it's got at the very, very top of the list modes of rotation. Now we've got local, world, and that word I said before. Someone can do a research project and find out where the word gimbal comes from. It's one of those odd things. I don't really know where it came from, but I can tell you that when you have gimbal, what you see is what you get. So now you can see with my manipulator that yellow circle has disappeared, and that when I select a rotation, only what's going on here? Why is it not? When you select something, see here on the arm there, I said before you only expect things to rotate in one direction there. So that's weird. Okay, so that only allows you, see how all the other ones are grayed out now? You can clearly see that that elbow is only supposed to rotate one way. Whereas this wrist will allow you rotations in X, it allows you rotations in Z, and in Y and in Z. Okay, so when you're in gimbal mode, your animation will be very manageable, and you're working within the constraints of what's physically possible for a rig. The good thing about working in gimbal, if it's not possible, it won't allow you to do it. If I were to use the other way of animating, the standard Maya rotation, and again, the way I did this was to double click on rotation and change to gimbal. There's a slightly faster way of doing that. as you advance, you can hold down the letter E and left mouse click. Oh, sorry, right. Where are we? It's not working here. Used to work. Something wrong with the computer. Normally you'd be able to hold down and get a marking key up, but this thing's not updating and that's not working. Let's just focus on the important thing, is that when I'm posing this, I'm posing at a little bit of that particular rotation, this rotation, and posing it that way. Okay? So as long as that somewhat resonates, and I don't expect you to instantly understand what I'm talking about, but just be aware that there is a particular way of rotating things for character rigs, which is going to lead to a much better outcome. So that's the way that you would pose a character standing on its foot. One of the nice things about any good rig is that if you were to select all the controllers, and then select all of the values and type 0, it should just pop back to its original pose. A good rig should have 0 values so that it can return to its base pose just by typing in 0. So if I wanted my character to now stand on its hands instead of going on its feet, the first thing I would do is I would make sure that my feet are in FK mode. I just changed that one there, select that one at the back. So now that's in FK mode. I want one of my hands to be in IK mode because it's supporting on the ground. So I'll grab the kinematic control of the hand and I'd switch that to IK mode. But this one here will be in the sky, in the balancing, so I'll leave that as FK. So I've roughly set my character up for that particular pose. And that's an important thing you want to do whenever you're either posing a character or even planning an animation, is to think about the kinds of interactions your character is going to have with the world and then use the correct kind of controller. So here, if I wanted my character to be balanced on the ground, now that I've got FK controls on the feet, you can see that I can roughly twist my body into the approximate position that the beam part of my body would be, and then I can move my hand down to the ground, to the position underneath, and I'll put it exactly on the ground. Say about there. I have to adjust the fingers. The point is that most of my work's already done if you choose the right kind of arm or leg setup. So now I get my body inside here, I can start to think about my spine. How is my spine oriented? So that might be something a bit more like that. Move that back down again. Maybe rotate the body. Now, in the same way as we had our issue with our leg pointing in a weird position, this is the same deal with an IK arm. You'll have a similar controller which dictates the orientation of the elbow. Generally, elbows tend to move in the direction of the arm. So if you've got an arm bent, the line of the hand and the forearm should also pretty much dictate the position of your elbow. So if you've got your hand in this direction, your elbow is most likely going to be underneath the hand like that, in a line. See how the line of the hand goes through the body like that? And then we can continue to adjust the rest of the body. So here I might get my pelvis parts, and then, oops. Okay, and every time that I change something, you might also decide that you need to shift the weight in order to make the body adjust and achieve some kind of balance. So here I'm feeling that I'm getting a lot of weight on that side, so we might want to adjust the way weight up a bit. And whatever. Another interesting thing as well, as we start to get through these exercises of adjusting and controlling your weight and balance, we'll naturally progress into the next topic, which is the line of action. Now, the line of action is an interesting concept that matches really well with balance in general, because when you've got something balanced, your body naturally tends to assume and acquire a particular shape, and that shape, if it's well balanced, is going to flow very well through the body. And you get these sorts of lines like this. See how I've got through the arm there? A line forming across the arm there. You've got a line forming through that leg, across the torso and back to the head. So you get these natural occurring lines when things are in balance. Okay? Again, I'm not saying that what I've done here is absolutely perfectly balanced. I'm sure you could all do much better than what I've shown here, but the whole idea that I want you to try is to choose some interesting pose and practice with a rig like this to get your character in convincing positions of balance. Does that make sense? Yep? Good. So that's your homework. You can do it now, you can do it in your own time, but I'd like you to try and send it to me before the end of the week. And again, it's not about assessment. This is all to do with your personal development. The same way as you don't assess a child as to how well it's crawling, they just keep at it because they know it's something they need to do. And if you want to be an animator, this is something you should know that you do need to do. It's practicing your animation muscles. And just the simple fact of grabbing a character like this, and as you're posing it, being able to have the practice and the understanding that when we position our arm, for example, we want to make sure that there's a relationship between my hand and my elbows that all flows through. Because the bad thing about computer rigs is that it's just as easy to do this, which could potentially work, but it doesn't look very nice. It's not aesthetically pleasing. And if you have a bit of an understanding of anatomy, your elbow really can't bend like that. It's very painful. Whereas the computer has absolutely no problems at all in bending things in unspeakable ways. Okay, so having some idea as to what is possible as you're creating the poses is a very helpful thing to have. And another thing too, see how as I'm posing this one here, I've put my arm, and that's the natural orientation of the bending of my arm, and yet the confusing thing about the arms is that you can rotate these things any way you want, but sometimes things just don't make any sense. So if I was up like this and I had my hand bending down, you'd want to have the shoulder rotated in a way which makes sense for that arm bending, because that arm can only bend one way. So generally what I like to do is that even if my arm is not going to be a straight pose, even if it's not going to be bent pose, bend it so I have some sort of idea as I'm posing it as to what's a sensible pose, what's a sensible orientation of the arm, so that now if I looked at my character that way, it's actually the thumb's back to front. My thumb's the right way around. Okay, so it doesn't seem like a very important thing to do, but once you start animating these, and if you have thumbs back to front, and you start moving and the character's walking and your thumbs are inside out, it's going to look like your character has had some kind of chemical treatment during pregnancy, and so its thumb's growing on the opposite side of its body. And people notice that. here, having your hands out in a position. And with the hands as well, it's also a good idea to try and put some kind of pose onto your hands. So here I'm selecting all of these things, and you can just give it some sort of shape which isn't this straight shape like that. And I'll select those ones here and maybe put that one there, just so his hand looks a little bit relaxed, not completely rigid. And it's fairly intuitive. You just have to select those things that you can see there and then rotate them. So that might be maybe extended out a bit, maybe rotate it around a little bit. No, just something interesting. So it's not just straight, what they call paddle hands. Okay, so when the hand is supporting the weight, you also want to make sure that that hand spreads the weight out a bit, so it feels like it's holding the weight of that hand. And another interesting thing that you can do to have a feeling of weight with a rig is to bend things down and then bend them halfway through, so you have a feeling as though it's supporting some weight there. So here on this hand here, we can say bend the hand down and then bend the second ones like this, so you get a feeling as though they're pushing against the ground. Okay, and that's, again, there's little things that you can do which can make the whole thing feel a lot nicer. So once you've got your pose, however you want your pose to look, and the more I look at this, the more I want to move things around. Move around it like this. Hold down Alt and the left mouse key and just inspect it from as many different angles as you can. Say, well, does it still look balanced from this angle? Does it still look balanced from this angle? Is there something I need to change? It should be able to hold up from every single angle. Because when you progress later on to character animation, every single pose that you do that's supposed to be a balanced pose should hold up to every single possible angle. It's not like when you're drawing on paper where you just draw it flat and that's it. This has to work in all angles, which doesn't have to. You'll get the best output as an animator if you take the time to make sure that your poses are very well balanced. And when you're finished, I want you to render the pose, render a pose. So the way we render something is you've got a little button here saying render, and if it works, you should have something like that. Okay, just a representation of your character. And that you can then right mouse click, file, save image, and change that to say a JPEG, and call that one your pose, save that somewhere, and that's what you can send me. Okay, that's your homework for the week. So does that make sense? I'm not saying it's going to be easy. We're understanding weight. We're also understanding how to manipulate and contort quite an involved. This rig here is as good a rig. You could get a job using this rig, for example. If you want to be an animator, you could use nothing but this rig and just animate, 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 and do nothing more. And just with this one rig, you could easily, well, not easily, you have the avenue and the direction to get a job as an animator. Because when people employ animators, they're looking for people who can animate. They don't want you to create the rig. They don't want you to light or texture it. They just want to see that you can make it move, that you've got a good sense of balance. That's what you're interested in. All right, so that's a fairly simple overview. One thing you may also want to do, if you're a bit of a perfectionist, you can put a ground plane onto it. So I just clicked plane, and that just gives the character a bit of context, so that when you render that, you'll see the way it looks on the ground. Okay, not that it really matters too much because there's no lights, there's no shadows, which is just gives you an idea as to where the character's situated. Alright, so if there's any questions about that, all good. I'll stop this recording now.